in this last encyclical.
Father, thank you for unpacking these two encyclicals. And I have a question. You talked about in the Love and Truth encyclical, the civil society has so eroded over the last several decades, and the power and the marketplace have taken so much more energy and power. How can we rebuild civil society, particularly, do you see anywhere anyone doing that in a systematic way? I'm the father of a couple of young adults. Education is not addressing this to them. This concept itself, to empower individuals, to build relationships, interpersonal relationships, family relationships, marriage, parishes, volunteering organizations, so that we can have some pushback to get some balance again. Do you see anything where that's happening, any schools that are actually teaching that?
Lynn Calabrese and I were talking last night as we came in from the airport about the fact that what was not taught very little in our time in terms of Catholic social teaching is now showing up much better now in Catholic education at multiple levels. So that's a sign of hope. I'd say we had a term in Catholic Charities. We talked about 3 goals of Catholic Charities. One was service to people in need. The other was advocacy for a better society. And the third one was convening. It was kind of a technical term, which meant bringing folks together to solve problems. One of the first ways of doing that was what was called parish social ministry, which was getting people in their local church parish to gather together to deal with problems. And that might come from the neighborhood's problems to the city's problems to the country's problems to the world's problems. And that work has continued. And in the new book I just finished, I really trace the Catholic Charities annual survey, which they do across the country every year, on the development of parish social ministry at 10-year intervals, and to watch actually the number of additional people that have become involved through the Catholic Charities agencies in parish social ministry. It's not just done through charities, it's done through other church organizations as well. I'd say there's a lot of hope there. One of the other movements people, got a little bit of some people decided to turn it into a curse word of something, but community organizing in this country in the last 50 years has been an amazing bringing people together to deal with their own problems. I mean, in its form, its pure form. You went into a neighborhood and you rang the doorbell until you found out what people were most concerned about. And then you brought them together to deal with it. That's working towards the common good. And it might start with getting a stop sign or a light at a corner where there's been an accident every month because people can't see one another because of the foliage or the buildings around there. But there are ways to do this, and I would say even the dialogue that's represented by this club is a movement towards the common good and having people engage in what the Pope called, kind of this rational discourse and dialogue about our issues. The fact that we have not been able to dialogue in this country really about health care, that these town hall meetings turned into screaming matches, is a terrible sign of the undermining of our country. And what you're pointing out. I mean, if we continue in this way, we're degrading our ability to be a democratically governed people, and we become then simply a collection of interest groups. And the common good is really meant for me to say not just what about my health care, but what about the fact. I mean, I worked the health care issue in 92 to 94, first at the Bishops' Conference as a health and welfare policy person, then at Catholic Charities USA. In those days, there were 32 million Americans without health insurance. That goes up by 1 million a year. It's 44 or 45 million people now. The common good says that should make me very concerned as an American, as in my case, as a Catholic Christian. I mean, the president tried to phrase it at the beginning of his address to Congress. This is a moral question. Health care is a moral human right. And as we stand by and watch 1 million more people a year lose it, people who have been middle class, steady jobs in factories and businesses, et cetera, now lose their health insurance, that's a moral problem. And until Americans realize it's a moral problem, we're not going to put our heads together to figure out how to solve it. If my approach to this question remains, what about me and my family, then I have no sense of the common good. And that's the dilemma we face right now, is are we losing that and becoming an interest group, whether it's my state, my set of employees, my business, my profession, or whether we ask the question, what is for the good of this country? And then a bigger question, which the Pope is challenging us to think about, which is what do we need to do for the good of the world? I mean, we have an enormous portion of the world's healthcare resources. And there are people dying of very simple diseases in Africa and Asia and Latin America and sometimes in our inner cities. And so It's really a question, it's really a challenge to all of us. And I think it begins as you're doing it with your own kids and your parish and the clubs you belong to. And one of the great things, remember, one of the great other things about this country, go back to de Tocqueville's visit to America, was he describes the fact that when America, and it struck him, it was very stunning to him coming from France. He said, he writes about this experience, when Americans see a problem, they get together and say, how can we deal with this? He was amazed at that characteristic of this country in the late 19th century.
The gentleman from Harvard named Robert Putnam wrote Bowling Alone, which is another view of that. Would you comment on how what he writes about this actually disengagement, I think he attributes a lot of it to mass media, but is actually pulling people apart from that common good?
There's lots of technological impact on us. There was an older woman, wonderful woman, who just died in Baton Rouge named Doucette Pascal, and Doucette would say to me, she was a prison ministry volunteer, and her husband was a distinguished law professor, and she said, Fred, the problem is air conditioning and TV. She said, because before air conditioning TV, this is the South now, she said, we had to sit on our porches till the house got cool enough to go in and sleep. And so you knew who was on the street and what was going on and whose kids were being beat up and who was out till 2 o'clock in the morning and who didn't belong in the neighborhood. She said, but the problem is we got into, I talk about it sort of buffered. We're buffered from the world around us. And so we can climb into our car in the morning and turn on the stereo system and pull up the windows and get the air conditioning on and drive on elevated expressways into downtown buildings and parking lots and eat inside and get back in the car and drive back out to our home and go back into the air conditioning home and not see hungry people or people in need around us. And so it's all of those things. And his thing, Bowling Alone, was that people used to gather for bowling and things like that, and now they're alone. And so a lot of groups have tried. I mean, the United Way has this Take 5 thing, which was about volunteering 5%, giving 5% of your money, taking 5% of your time for your community. And so one of the questions we all have to ask is, what do I do for the larger community? How do I engage people in dealing with the problems around us? That's why the importance in Catholic social teaching of this subsidiarity thing, that you needed to move things down to where they could be solved. But you also, that was solidarity, you needed to move up if the problem was bigger. The city of New Orleans cannot solve the international trade problem. That has to be solved by an international body and governments together. I can't solve the international trade problem, and I can't solve the drug problem. That has to be solved by a lot of other entities. And so those two principles were in tension with one another. Subsidiarity, which is keeping people involved at levels at which they can do something, and not taking that responsibility away from them to, quote, a larger entity. And solidarity, saying we got to move up to whatever level we got to move to solve the problem. So New Orleans can't solve the national health care crisis. That has to be solved nationally. And so that's the way those principles intersect. But it is a challenge to all of us, and I think, again, one of the credits to this club is that you all are working at these problems. Thank you.
Today at the City Club of Cleveland, we've been listening to Father Fred Kammer, Director of the Jesuit Research Center at Loyola University, New Orleans. We want to thank Father Kammer very much for being with us today. We want to thank you, ladies and gentlemen, and this forum is now adjourned.